Hey folks, welcome to the channel. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Nate Stewart. I'm a mortgage broker here in Puerto Rico, and I wanted to make this video about the earnest money deposit, or the good faith deposit, or it goes by lots of names. El depósito de buena fe, sometimes called in Spanish, or el depósito de la opción, like the option. What is it? It's the money that, as the buyer, that you send when you get your offer accepted and you sign the contract, right after all the negotiations. You send the seller essentially some money to say, look, hang on to this money. Don't take any other offers. Hang on to this while we work on closing. And that's like the makes the seller feel nice, because they know that they've got some money on the side that, if the buyer starts doing some funny business, that they can, like, well, now I'm keeping your deposit, right? And so there's like that incentive there, so that the seller isn't taking any other offers and that the buyer is supposed to be diligently working towards closing. And then the idea is, at closing, all of that money gets contributed to your as the buyer, gets contributed to your down payment and closing costs, right? Sometimes people ask, well, can it go just to down payment? Can it go just to closing costs? It's not really like that. It just goes into the pot and then gets distributed to whatever your total costs are. It just gets contributed to those things. Typically at the end of the process, right before we close, buyers usually have to send additional funds, right, to cover, on top of that deposit, to cover other closing costs, to cover more of the down payment if that's needed. And so that the buyer right before closing sends another deposit, sends another wire transfer. And that's and the two funds together, those two transfers combine to cover all of your costs at closing. But the earnest money deposit in Puerto Rico, there's not a specific amount that it always is. In other parts of the U.S., in other markets, we see that it's more commonly like 2% or maybe 3%, right? And it's very often like this standardized amount. But in Puerto Rico, first of all, important to note, you don't have to have an earnest money deposit. If you can, sometimes we see, like, if the buyer and seller know one another personally, like outside of the transaction, sometimes there's not a need, for that earnest money deposit. Like, you trust the seller, everybody trusts one another. It's not sometimes necessary, but in other circumstances, it is necessary. You do, as a buyer, you do want to incentivize the seller not to take any other offers, and the seller wants an incentive, to know that you're working diligently. And so typically we see the earnest money deposit amount is most often about 5% of the purchase price. Now that's high, right? Compared to other markets. Say that you're buying a house for $100,000, that's the purchase price. That means that a 5% deposit is going to be $5,000 on a $100,000 house that you're going to send to an escrow account, that's going to sit on the sidelines. Versus in other parts of the U.S., we might see it be more like 2 or 3%. In Puerto Rico, the most common value is 5%, right? So be ready for that. However, it is negotiable. It doesn't have to be 5%. That's just, that's usually like the default amount. Typically real estate agents, the listing agent, they want to see that, if they're charging a 5% commission to the seller, they're going to want to see that your deposit would be sufficient to cover that full deposit. If you, walk away from the deal, or if you get up to some shenanigans and you're not able to close because you're just not being diligent or something like that, they're going to want to know that the agent, that their full compensation is sitting in that account if you start to not be diligently trying to get to closing, right? At the end of the day, like when we close, those funds go from, the account that they're sitting in, and like I said, they get contributed to the rest of the funds that you need to close. But in Puerto Rico, another important detail to be aware of is that it doesn't usually, your funds, your earnest money deposit, it does not usually just go sit in like a true, objectively third party's escrow account. Most commonly, the listing agents, they have their own escrow account that they set up just for this purpose. And that is typically where you're going to send your wire or send your deposit money. They accept lots of different forms. It can be personal check, certified check, bank check, or whatever. It can be a wire transfer. Basically, they just want you to put that money in that account so that they know that you're working towards getting closed. But that's what I was saying, is that it's very often in an escrow account managed by the listing agent. Now, if you're not comfortable with it, like a lot of folks, coming from the States to buy, if you are, may not feel comfortable with that. It's also possible to use, like the title company. They can set up an escrow account and manage it, and they might be, more likely to be like a true objective third party. So if there is a dispute about why we're not able to close, and they're going to go to the contract and say, okay, what does the contract say about like if the financing is not approved, or if it appraises under, or if there's shenanigans and somebody's just trying to like change their mind and walk away for whatever reason. Like a true third party escrow account manager is going to be the one who looks at the agreement and decides, nope, the seller is correct. The buyer's not been diligent, so the seller gets to keep that full deposit, or vice versa, right? So like a third party. However, if you deposit that money into the listing agent's account, well, it might be a bit more difficult to, if there's shenanigans, if there's funny business, or let me just say, if there's a dispute about why we're not able to proceed, and if there's ambiguity in that contract, it can get a little tricky to get that money back. Thankfully, I haven't seen it go one time like that, knock on wood. I haven't seen it go like that before, where like a listing agent is like clearly being biased and just trying to keep a deposit. I've not ever seen that, but you never know, right? And so it's always best to trust but verify. This is why it's super important, the language in your contract, and it's also super important to know like where is that money going to be sitting? Is it a true escrow account, or is it just somebody's personal bank account? Definitely don't send your earnest money deposit to someone's personal bank account. It should be an actual escrow account set up for that purpose, right? And but if you need any help, right? If you're negotiating a contract, you want to know, like what language you should have in there, or how protected you are, or anything like that, feel free to reach out to me. I am not an attorney, but I do see a lot of contracts, and I can help provide some support with that. But that's a little bit about the earnest money deposit /EMD /good faith deposit /deposito de buena fe, all the different names that it goes by. If you have any other questions, my contact info is going to be down in the description. But thanks very much for watching all the way to this part at the end. I appreciate that. So maybe if you get some value from this, feel free to hit the like button or subscribe. But anyway, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.